All right, guys, so now we need to add the handler functionality because right now I can't select anything different for the type. I can't type anything in. So we want to create our add the functionality to these three handlers. Now, one thing I did in the last video is I made a mistake by I had property type. I'm not going to go back, but for the ID and name and the label for, I had property underscore type. You want to make sure that that's just type because the name needs to match whatever is in the state. So type and type because we're going to be using that name in our handler. So just make sure that you have type and not property type. All right, and I'll change it in the theme as well. So in the handle change here, let's pass in our event object. And if we log, let's say e.target.name, and I just type anything in description, you'll see that I get the name description. So I want that, and I also want the value, so e.target value. So if I type something in here, you can see just the first thing that I type in. So let's destructure and take both of the name and the value from that e.target. So we can do that by destructuring and taking the name and the value. Now we want to check for nested properties like location and seller info. These are nested. And in the name for those, let's just find one down here. So for instance, if I can find one, so rates, for instance. Rates, there's a dot, right? It's rates.weekly. I'm sorry, we should be looking at the name. It's rates.weekly. So we can check for that dot, and then we know that it's a nested property. So let's do that. Let's say if the name, if that includes a dot or period, then we're going to destructure, we're going to say name.split, right? Because we want to split it on the dot. And then here we can get the outer key. So call this outer key and inner key. And just to show you what that is, we can console log outer key, outer key, inner key. And then let's go and put something into one of those nested, let's see, we'll do the location. So if I type something in here, you'll see location street. Okay, so outer key is location and inner key is street. Now we want to update the state by calling set fields. So let's say set fields. And what we're going to do is pass in a function that takes in the previous value that fields has. And then we're going to set that to, let's put parentheses and then curly braces because we're setting it to an object. And we want to spread across the previous fields. Actually, I'll call this prev fields. Okay, so we'll spread across what's already there, but then we want to take we're going to use the outer key as the name, which we just saw was location, right? So in brackets, we're going to say outer key. Make sure you have brackets or it'll just use literally outer key. And we'll set that to an object. And then we want to take the previous fields again and spread those across and then use the outer key as the index. Okay, so previous fields, outer key. And then we just want to put a comma, and I'll go on the next line here, and then we're going to use the inner key and set that to whatever the value is. All right, so that will update it if it's a nested value like, or a nested object value like location.street or sellerinfo.email. And then in the else here, okay, so if it's not nested, then we simply need to set fields. And again, we're going to take the previous fields, so pre fields, and then we want to set that to an object and just spread across the previous fields, and then simply take the name in brackets and set that to the value. All right, so that should do it. So if I save that, we can test this out. First of all, we can now type in here, right? But let's go to our React DevTools and make sure that it's actually being added to the state. So if we go to our property add form and we look at right here, yeah, so here's our state, and let's go to description and start typing, and you can see that that gets filled. Now let's try one of these nested properties. So I'll go to the location street, start typing, and that gets filled. The street gets filled. Okay, so all of those, anything that basically everything except amenities and the image now have a handler. So now let's move on to the handle amenities change. And I'm actually just going to put a couple comments up here just to make sure that this is clear. So here we're check if nested property, here not nested. And then for handle amenities change, let's pass in our event object, and then I'm going to do the same thing I did above, except I'm going to get the value and I'm going to get the checked if it's checked, and that's going to be from e.target. Okay, then what we want to do is clone the current amenities array. So we'll do that by setting a variable called updated amenities, and let's set that to an array, and then we want to just spread across fields dot amenities. Okay, so that'll clone the array. Then we want to check to see if it's checked, because remember this fires off for all of the inputs. So let's say if checked, then we want to add the value to the array. So add value to array. We'll do that by saying updated amenities, and we'll push on to that array the value. Else, then we want to remove value from array, and we're going to do that by first getting the index. So we can do that by saying updated amenities dot index of, and then pass in the value. Okay, now if it's not there, it's going to return -1, -1. That's what index of does. So we'll check for that. Let's say if the index is not equal to -1, that means that it's there. So then we want to take it out, and we can do that using splice. So we'll say splice from wherever the index is and 1. All right, then we have to update the field. So we want to go outside of that if checked, that if else, and let's say update state with updated array. So we'll do that by calling set fields, and we're going to pass in here just like we did above. We're going to pass, actually this is going to be an object, so we want parentheses around it, and let's say prev fields, and then we want to spread across prev fields, and then for amenities we're going to set it to that updated amenities array. Okay, so again, we're just getting the value, and if it's checked, and checking if it's checked. If it is, we push it onto the array. If it's not, we take it off. Then we set the state. So let's test that out. So first of all, we should be able to check these. Right now, if I go to my React DevTools and we go to the form, property add form, you can see in the array of amenities, I have Wi-Fi because it's checked. If I check free parking, Now that's getting added to the state. If I uncheck it, then it gets removed from the state. So we know that that's working correctly. So the last thing we have is the image, right? Handle image change. So let's pass in our event, and then when you submit a form and there's a file input, you get an array called files. So we're gonna get that, say files, and we want to get that from e.target. In fact, we can do a quick console log just to show you what that looks like. So if I choose a file, just choose one of these thumbnails here, and you can see when I select it, it's logging to the console the file list. And there's one file, it has last modified date, name, size, type. All right, so what we want to do now is, first of all, clone the current images array. And when I say images array, I mean this right here in our state, which obviously is empty by default. So let's say clone images array. And we'll do that same thing we did with amenities. We'll say updated images, because we're going to be able to select multiple images. In fact, let me show you that real quick. So if I do this and this, then notice there's two images there. Okay. So updated images, and then let's set that to an array spread across fields.images. Okay, then we want to add the new files to the array. So we can do that by using a for loop. So we'll say for const, or I should say a for of loop. So const file of files. And then we're just going to say updated images, and we're going to push onto that the file. All right, then we just need to update state with array of images. So let's say set fields, and then we're going to pass in our function, return an object, pass in pre-fields into the function, and then here just spread across pre-fields, and then for images we're going to set that to the updated images array. Okay, let's test it out. I'm just going to reload, and then I'm going to open up my React DevTools. Let's go to property add form. Okay, and then in the state, we'll look at our object here. Images is empty, but if I come over here and I choose, let's say these two, and open, now my state has two files with all that data. Okay, so our form is now complete. Obviously, there's no submission functionality, but as far as the state goes and the change handlers, that's all set. So in the next video, we're going to start to work on the API route that we're going to submit this form to.